Hello and welcome to Signs and Wonders. A little while ago, I was talking about the Yoruba tribe in Western Africa and how they think that all you need to know about your fate and destiny is locked inside your head. That was in Signs and Wonders, I think it was 25. Anyway, check back. Let me have a look, my list. Yes, 25, if you want to catch up with that, if you haven't seen it yet. So I came across recently, because as you know, my research into angels means that I read a lot of mystical stuff, and I have over the years. And particularly because of the angels, that mystical stuff tends to come from the Jewish tradition, Jewish Kabbalah particularly. And one of the most famous kabbalists who lived in 13th century Spain was a man called Abraham Abulafia. And his stuff is really interesting because he encourages people to meditate on the names of God and to do kind of free association, because what he's presenting is the idea that anyone can contact the divine and become a, quote, prophet, not prophesying the future so much as being conscious of what is going on, being aware. You could say being enlightened. It's not a word that you use in Jewish mysticism particularly. So I came across a quotation from Abulafia, which I'm going to read you. Here we go. That, at this time, he says, that which was hidden has been revealed, because forgetfulness has reached its final limit. The end of forgetfulness is the beginning of remembrance. Now, this is from a treatise of his called Or Ha-Sakel, and Sakel, or means light, and Sakel means intelligence or intellect, or sometimes is translated as reason, but it can also mean wisdom. So it's got a lot of words you could translate it as, but it basically means a kind of knowledge, the light of knowledge, right? It's the light bulb moment. And I wanted to bring that to your attention because of the things I've been saying recently about looking out for the signs, looking out for the directives, the mitzvot I talked about in another earlier video. Looking out for the signs, because that's when you remember why you're here. And I think it's really interesting to look at it from the point of divination. You know, when you draw cards, or when you use I Ching, is a favourite of mine, or when you use astrology, because there is a limit to forgetfulness. That's what he's saying. And then you come to the beginning of remembrance. And it's when you start on a journey to say, I need to know why I'm here. I need to know, kind of have a sense of purpose. What's the point, right? And of course, in the last century, we had a lot of existential philosophers and people who said, actually, it's all pointless. It doesn't mean anything at all. But every individual's life means something to them. It has to, otherwise they wouldn't go on living. And it can be meaningful in small ways, you know, just like, you know, keeping your house in order, or your physical house in order, can be meaningful for people. And then if that goes down the pan because they're not very well, then they feel out of sorts. But I'm talking about a more overarching sense of meaning, why you feel you are here. Now, if we look at the astrological signs of that, you can get your birth chart read, or, you know, you can pick it up online and you can start, you know, going through the different ideas that relate to placements of the different planets and so forth. And it can start giving you a picture of what is going on in your noodle. I don't know whether you saw that video, that was an earlier one. And then you start getting a sense of, yeah, that feels so right. Because in a way, you are remembering what you'd already got in you as knowledge. And mentioning again a book by James Hillman, The Soul's Code, he uses the metaphor of the acorn. The acorn knows, it remembers how to be an oak tree, and then it becomes an oak tree. Because that's built in. And the scientists would tell you, of course, you remember who you are because your DNA is a record of your genetic inheritance, and that's what's unfolding in your physiology and possibly in some of your behavioural traits as well. But what we're talking here about is a kind of spiritual DNA, trying to unpick the codes or the commands. I talked about that in an earlier video as well. The commands for your particular process, which includes your physiology, but is also to do with your spiritual journey. And this is why astrology has always been presented for thousands of years, well, particularly what we call natal astrology, horoscopic astrology, would date back to, at least 2,000 years. And what's been presented there is to tell you that those gods representing the planets have got various potentials, and that you can work with those potentials while you're in a human life. Now, what I think is very interesting in the present time, from the astrologer's point of view especially, is that there was a point in history not so long ago when we created telescopes that meant that we could see beyond Saturn. So those ancient astrologers, the Hellenistic astrologers they're called, because that was the world they lived in. They were Greek or Roman, but that was a time that they lived in. They could only see as far as Saturn, and so they created horoscopes, birth charts for people, which only included those planets. And Saturn has often been called the Lord of Boundaries, partly because of the rings that go around him, but partly because he's the last planet that you can see with your naked eye. So the concept that when you are born, you forget what you're coming for. There's a forgetfulness. This goes back to the story of Plato about crossing the river of forgetfulness, Lethe. And Abulafia said that the end of forgetfulness is the beginning of remembrance. So how do we remember what we're here for if there's some kind of river or some kind of space in which everything is forgotten? So have a think about those planets again. Okay, so think about going out towards Saturn. That's the limit. And if you think of the traditional planets as marking out your human life, your humanity, your presence in the world, where you've forgotten, you've got to go past Saturn in order to come to a place where you start remembering. So I'm going to try and explain this a little bit further quite briefly, but it probably is something I need to put in a blog or even in a full class, of course. But think of it like this. You've forgotten. You've come into this world. You've gone through the river of forgetfulness, as Plato says, and here you are. And you would like to remember why you came. In astrological terminology, that would mean going beyond Saturn, because Saturn is the Lord of Boundaries. You could say Saturn is the point of necessity where you enter the world after that river. So now we've discovered the other planets. we've got an edge over those Hellenistic astrologers, I have to say, although I think their work was totally brilliant and is very useful to us nowadays. But we've seen beyond the boundary. We've seen Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And Pluto has a moon as well, at least one. So where do we go next then? What do we see when we step beyond the boundary? Now, from an angelic point of view, let's go back to Abulafia. He says, or Hasakel, the light of the intellect, the intellects, the intelligences. That's also a word that's used for the planets, for the angelic spirits of the planets, right? So you want to go beyond Saturn and you want to deal with the next planet out. Let's think about who that is or what that is. That's Uranus. Now, Uranus in modern astrology is associated with breakthroughs. It's the spirit of revolution. It's the spirit of immense change, very sudden change. And Uranus breaks down the boundaries of Saturn. It overturns the status quo. No more boundaries. And Uranus is telling you, the energy of that can tell you how to start remembering things. And that comes back to this eureka moment. Now, let me take this one step further. Who is the angel or the intellect, if you like, the intelligence of Uranus? Well, the way I've approached this and from my insights, and, this is perhaps reasonably unique to my own teaching, because it's not in old Kabbalah, because they didn't know about Uranus. But I would associate Uranus with the archangel called Raziel. Raziel or Galizur. Now, the old Jewish story of this archangel is that he stands on a rock, and the rock is surrounded by a curtain. And the curtain or the veil is what separates heaven from earth. And Raziel is able to stand on that rock and listen to the directives of, quote, God, and deliver something to humanity on earth. So this fits in with the story of Uranus being a breakthrough planet. It's like something new can be delivered in an exciting and dramatic new way. And that is going beyond forgetfulness and remembering. And I believe that when scientists have breakthroughs, like discovering DNA, for example, there's a breakthrough there because the scientist discovers something that he already knows. After all, he's got DNA in his system, so he must know it at some level. But the breakthrough is actually bringing it into his understanding. So he forgot. He's got DNA in him, all these centuries and centuries and generations of human beings, and they've all had DNA in the system. But it takes a breakthrough to understand it and remember it, to bring it into the conscious awareness of humanity as a whole. And that's what the scientist Francis Crick did. And he says that it happened because of a dream or a vision where he saw the snakes entwining. And then we look back at all the history of healing and we see the snakes entwining, all the old gods. In many, many cultures, snakes twining. So the breakthrough happens because we have an energetic potential to break through the boundaries of forgetfulness and remember what is going on. And I think that's what's happening for us historically today. We are at a point where more and more people are remembering why they came, what they're here for. And not just that, but remembering some kind of innate quality or innate potential that we have as a collective, as human beings. And that is not dropped onto us from an outside deity with a finger pointing at us. It arises from inside us. And we go beyond those boundaries of Saturn and allow the Uranian energy to come in. And of course, in modern astrology, Uranus is associated with the planet Aquarius. And interestingly, in old astrology, associated with the planet Saturn. So there's a bumping up against each other kind of arrangement between those two gods. Uranus is the one who can deliver the potential to remember. And he's represented in the angelic pantheon by Raziel, by Galizur, who stands on the rock. And again, you can go back to an early Signs and Wonders and listen to what I've been saying about the rock being a landmark, a directive, a place that gives you a sign for moving forward in your journey. And we all need to have that Uranian Raziel breakthrough. And then we know exactly why we're here, what we're doing, how we should spend our time, and definitely how we should not waste our time. So keep shining, and I'll be back again before long. Keep meditating. That allows you to have these breakthroughs. It can be immense and so life-changing. Blessings.